politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. And so you've got to continually add without losing, your core.
Right.
And so I think that's something that Alan has done very, very well in this primary. And I think that's why you saw supporters of, people like Ralph Norman
Right.
and Rom Reddy
Right.
and Nancy Mace come to him in the runoff, because obviously he got a lot more votes in the runoff than he did in the primary, whereas the lieutenant governor actually lost about 30,000 votes.
Wow. Welcome to the Palmetto Family Matters Show. I'm Steve Pettit, president of Palmetto Family Council, and today we are here with the illustrious Mr. Randy Page, executive vice president of Palmetto Family Council. And Randy, welcome.
It's great to be here this morning. It was a big night last night for the state of South Carolina, as we saw primaries across the state and in several of the congressional districts. So excited to talk about those with you and our listeners today.
Well, we woke up to a new state. We're in the state of a new state here in South Carolina with the leadership of Alan Wilson and Mike Rickenbach, two of God's finest people. We're so thankful for them. And then we have at least that we haven't had the full elections yet in November.
Correct. Right. Yes. So, but we have on the Republican Party side, a really good setup.
A good setup.
And I think, as you look at these elections, understanding that this is the first time that we've, had an open governor's seats in 10 years, and then an open attorney general seat in 16 years. And so just a lot of movement, a lot of big races up and down the ballot.
And I think a lot of excitement.
Absolutely.
And I think all of us who are South Carolinians realize that the state is at a crossroads.
It is.
A crossroads about our future and what kind of state are we going to have in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And of course, as we all know, everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yes.
Especially in the State House of South Carolina.
Yes.
So we believe good executive leadership is important, good legislative leadership, working together, having a vision for the state of South Carolina being the best state out of the 50. And if you're from here, you feel that in your soul.
Absolutely.
So very excited about last night. Well, you were there at the acceptance speech of Alan Wilson?
It was, yes.
Tell me about it.
Sure. It was really an electric atmosphere. I mean, the media was there in full force, and people from all over the state showed up nice and early to get into the party last night. And in fact, there was a lot of discussion among the media about what time they felt the Associated Press was going to call the race for Wilson, and they felt that it was going to be closer to 8 o'clock. And then I literally was talking to my good friend Jane Robelo from WYFF, and her phone buzzed, and she goes, "Wow, the Associated Press just called it." It was 7:28, I believe.
Wow.
And so, a lot changed, kind of moved up the timeline for when Alan was going to speak. And, Alan was there and was joined by several attorneys general from across the nation, as well as the governor of Louisiana, Jeff Lantry.
Man. Yeah, there are a lot.
So, it was interesting, particularly being there last night, and then to rewind 2 weeks ago when you saw, Alan come in second in a 5-way primary. The president had endorsed Pamela Evett in the primary. And so it was just kind of a total flip that way. And a lot of things happened throughout the primary runoff as far as, endorsements. You saw, I think, the elevation particularly of the casino gambling issue during the runoff. And so I think there were a number of different things that contributed to the record-breaking 69-31 win by Wilson and company, which in runoffs here in South Carolina, That is the record from a percentage basis.
Wow.
In 2002, Mark Sanford got 60% in the runoff, and in 2010, Nikki Haley got 65%. So Wilson picked up 69%.
That
And
is
so
huge.
It was really, really big. And so it was just interesting just to watch just the change over the 2 weeks.
It's interesting to me as I watch the entire process of election, even all the way back when Allen chose Mike Rickenbach for his running mate, and he was basically the only guy that did that.
Right.
And I was actually thinking everybody else was going to follow suit, and they
Right.
didn't.
Right.
And the moment he chose Mike, my first response is brilliant,
Yes.
brilliant, because Mike is a tremendous person. He and his wife, they not only business people, but state senator, very articulate. He has a tremendous background, strong Christian. And then a variety,
Yes.
his
Absolutely.
African-American background.
Right.
So I think the two of them combined had a great force. Tell me, why do you think, maybe for the average listener wondering how could Pam be really in first place and then suddenly get beat so bad?
Sure. I mean, it's not unusual for that to happen, because sometimes, people further down the ballot where their friends come in, they go like, I knew they probably wouldn't make it, but I wanted to support them in the primary, but I'm going to support, someone else in the runoff. And so that is unprecedented from a political standpoint. I mean, I think what was, interesting is, particularly when you saw, Nancy Mace come out the night of the election and endorse Allen. You saw Ron Reddy say, I'm not going to endorse, but I'm going to vote for Allen Wilson.
Yeah.
And then, Ralph Norman took several days. But I think that was a key endorsement in the runoff, was the Norman endorsement, because he did really, really well in the upstate,
Very well.
Greenville to York County. And if you look at the numbers, last night and this morning, Wilson cleaned clock up there. I mean, I think in Greenville County, he was over 75% of the vote.
Wow.
And in a county that provided 13% of the statewide vote. So Greenville County had 13% of the statewide vote in the
Go
runoff.
Greenville.
So it was just really interesting to watch those dynamics. And going back to the lieutenant governor, naming the lieutenant governor, this is a relatively new phenomenon in South Carolina, because used to the governor and the lieutenant governor ran on separate tickets.
Mm-hmm.
So Pamela Yvette was the first lieutenant governor that ran with Henry McMaster in as a ticket. And so there really wasn't precedence for naming a lieutenant governor either early or late or however.
Right.
But I do think political scientists are going to look back and say that was a key difference for Allen Wilson, in that, Mike was from a different area, and he represented, as African-American, is a sitting state senator, and
Florence,
so really
it's
brought a
completely
lot of
different,
different things, to the table, to whereas, Allen could be one place and Mike could be somewhere else.
Right.
Whereas the others were really kind of limited. Obviously, Ralph Norman picked Adam Morgan out of Greenville, and, I think it was for about a week and a half to 2 weeks before the
Right.
first primary.
Right.
And I think even they saw how effective that was, because it really doubled, what was going on there. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward what governor candidates do. But I do think in this particular instance, the Wilson pick early really, really helped him.
Yeah, and as we all, those of you that are South Carolinians know that historically the office of the governor in South Carolina is weaker,
Correct.
comparatively to other states like Florida,
Right.
and Arkansas, and other places, Tennessee, and yet slowly, drip by drip, there has been a movement to strengthen the executive office.
Right.
And I think, people are going to want that. People don't want a paper tiger
Correct.
for governor.
Absolutely.
They want leadership.
Right.
And if we can't get anything done, it gets frustrating. So I'm hoping that, and I think Alan is the right guy because he's been in the government long enough to, everybody knows him.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I think one of the key takeaways, last night was a statement in his speech where he said he didn't want to be a transitional governor. He wanted to be a transformational governor.
Absolutely.
And so I think, as you started out the top of the program, South Carolina is standing at a crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, are we going to, move in a more conservative direction? Or are we going to maintain status quo? Obviously, Alan Wilson made it very clear that status quo was no go.
Right.
And so obviously we've got general elections coming up this fall, and got to win some more elections.
Right.
But, hearing the Republican nominee boldly state where he was going and where he wanted to take the party in South Carolina was really, really good. And I think, particularly his conciliatory tone
Yes.
towards the other candidates and their supporters. Yes. I think that was really good leadership and understanding that, they weren't all on his team to begin with, but he welcomes them and,
Right.
Continues to welcome them, because you've got to understand that politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. And so you've got to continually add without losing, your core.
Right.
And so I think that's something that Alan has done very, very well in this primary. And I think that's why you saw supporters of, people like Ralph Norman
Right.
and Rom Reddy
Right.
and Nancy Mace come to him in the runoff, because obviously he got a lot more votes in the runoff than he did in the primary, whereas the lieutenant governor actually lost about 30,000 votes.
Wow. Wow.
So,
Well, tell me this. I'm sitting here and I'm a South Carolinian. We know Alan's going to run as Republican governor. Typically, historically, the chances of him winning are pretty high.
correct.
What are, if I'm a South Carolinian, what am I hoping for? What do I foresee out of the Wilson Rickenbach administration?
Well, I think some of the themes that he, really talked about last night was affordability, looking at, where we are with infrastructure, really taking the money that we have and using it much more effectively than we do right now. I think looking at issues like judicial reform, universal school choice, understanding that, South Carolina has a long way to go on school choice, that, right now we're, excited about having 15,000 students with education savings accounts, while
We
Florida,
got a whole lot more that
Yes.
want to move forward on that.
Florida has over, 500,000.
Yeah.
And so, there are some baby steps that we've taken, and I think he's going to really take that forward. He also made it very, very clear that, deals like Scout Motors were over with him as governor. And so I think you're going to see a very conservative governor who uses the bully pulpit really, really well, who knows how to work with the legislature. And I think that once elected, you're going to see some really strong conservative legislation, be touted and promoted and then ultimately signed into law by Governor Wilson.
Yeah, that's exciting. Let's go back, Randy, to what you said earlier, because maybe a lot of people didn't quite pick up on this, but actually the issue of gambling casinos really popped up.
It did. I mean, it popped up in a big way. I think it was one of the major differences between the Attorney General and the Lieutenant Governor. And, our 501c4 Palmetto Family Alliance sent a pledge to each of the candidates for governor, the Lieutenant Governor, the Attorney General, and to State Representative Jermaine Johnson. Of the three, only the Attorney General, Alan Wilson, returned it, saying that he would veto a bill that would bring casinos to South Carolina. And it was a key issue. I think it was one that was mentioned a lot last night. On the C4 side, we engaged in a text campaign on that particular issue, particularly in the upstate. And, I do think even reading some of the mainstream news media, there was at least one voter that was quoted, I think it was in the Post and Courier, saying that she had voted for the lieutenant governor in the initial primary, but when found out that she was, wouldn't take a stand against casino gambling, voted for Wilson in the runoff. And so, obviously I don't know how many of those took root, but it was also, I think, one of those things that when you talked with, supporters, particularly of Congressman Norman, and Congressman Norman made it very clear
Where he was.
where he was, and that was one of the reasons that he was supporting Alan Wilson for governor. And so I do think that it was a referendum on gambling. And, through our C4, we were able to really elevate that issue. And I think the voters, it resonated with them. And that's why there was, at least in proportion, a reason for why there was such a resounding victory for Team Wilson.
Well, I think it says something today that will resonate with our listeners, and particularly where our mission is at Palmetto Family, which is we're the voice for biblical values and the centers of influence in South Carolina. And we have very, very clear principles,
Absolutely.
a biblical worldview by which we operate. And, but when we look at it in a general way of leadership, because everything, as we've already said, rises and falls on leadership,
Yes.
that weak moral leadership is really the curse would be the curse of our country.
Absolutely.
And the curse of our state.
Absolutely.
And we are glad that Alan came out with definitive, clear, common sense, moral leadership on issues that resonate with people who are saying, this is what we want for our state. We don't want this. And that's why I say we're at a crossroads.
We really are. And you talk about Palmetto Family, for our 501c4 Palmetto Family Alliance, it literally is in our DNA, because Palmetto Family Alliance came about because of the fight against video poker back in the 90s. And so those of us who have lived in South Carolina for decades saw what video poker did to South Carolina, saw the video poker industry take out a sitting Republican governor because of his opposition to gambling, and installed someone who was, much more amenable to what they wanted to do. And so they have that ability. And the interesting thing is some of the very same players in the video poker industry were the ones pushing the casino here in South Carolina. And it was a clear no from Republican voters in yesterday's runoff. And that's interesting to see. I'm thankful for the leadership of the Attorney General, and look forward to working with him once elected on enacting real family-first policies across the board for families to thrive here in South Carolina.
Well, one of the things I want to ask you about, this is a little bit of a sideline, but it is a core with Alan coming in, working with Mike Rickenbach on the family. And at the very core of family is education.
Yes.
At the very core.
Yes.
And that the biblical view is that the primary responsibility of all education is in the hands of the parents.
Correct.
And giving parental rights for education, parental rights for moral and religious training, giving parental rights in the medical decisions of families. Those are all things that we need to pass in South Carolina, which is up in bills coming forward. So
correct.
Those are there to let South Carolina people know. Those bills are there, and we need to get them through. But you have been involved in school choice and education a long time. Decades. You know as much as anybody in South Carolina. Maybe in just a very short statement, tell us why full school choice is so important for South Carolina.
Well, I think, looking back as to, where we are right now, South Carolina offers special needs scholarships, as well as the 15,000 educational savings account scholarships. And so every parent should have the ability to put their child in whatever school best serves that particular child. You're a parent. I'm a parent. Both of my kids learn differently.
Right.
And could thrive in different types of things. I had the ability to choose the best school for my children, but not everybody does.
Right.
And I think, particularly, I remember, back in the, 2000s when we were fighting school choice here in South Carolina, and I had a mother from Lee County in my office just crying because her 12th grade, getting ready to graduate son, could not read. He had been passed year after year after year. The mother kept going back and forth, with the school board and with the principal, and they did not see that as a problem.
Wow.
Which was just, for me, just astounding.
Right.
And so, I look at it as every parent should have the ability to find the best place for each individual child, and that whether it's, through educational savings accounts, whether it's through tax credits, that everything should be open. And particularly when you look at the I-95 corridor, the cycles of poverty also create cycles of education that just are not the best. Mm-hmm. And so being able to go, okay, South Carolina actually owns all of the buses here in South Carolina. So why are we not transporting students to better schools?
Right.
Whether they be public, whether they be public charter, or even private schools. Right. Because there are other states in the nation that literally, if you're a student in school, you get transported to whatever school you're going to. And so there are a lot of things that I think we need to look at. And, I think we've seen an explosion, particularly in public charter, which has really opened up a lot there. But I think there are a number of places where you're seeing, private Christian schools that would thrive, and that there's really a demand for them. And looking at that, particularly the I-95 corridor, where if they had transportation and if they had the ability to afford tuition, then their children could go and get a really good education and get out of a bad cycle that they're just currently stuck in. Right.
I'm going to shift a little bit here and ask you a question that you can really, I think, help people with, and that is the importance of and the lack of voting, just voting by Christian people.
Yes.
So, unless you can correct me on this, if I'm not mistaken, that 70%, let's see, when you look at the Republican Party in South Carolina.
Correct.
Is it 70% of them are professing evangelicals?
I think it's closer to 60, but still, I mean,
it's a high percentage.
It's a big number. And
how many registered Republicans in South Carolina?
Well, we don't register by party,
okay.
But it's in yesterday's runoff, we had 318,000 people vote.
Out of how many?
A big number.
A big number.
And
10%. 10%.
And so, it's always funny for me when I talk with pastors, particularly ones who think their congregation is engaged.
Yes.
And I say, okay, my guess is if I walk into your church, 50% of those eligible to vote aren't even registered. They're like, oh, no. I said, no, I'm serious. And I said, and then of those 50%, half of those don't vote. So you're literally 1 out of every 4 that is eligible is voting in South Carolina.
Right.
Whereas if I think the church itself took voting responsibly, we wouldn't be scratching our head and wondering, why do we get some of the candidates that we get in some of the areas?
Right.
It's just crazy to me that particularly in a state like South Carolina, that you've got to look at, certain candidates who are just should not fly, but because people don't vote, they get elected.
Yeah. So that's definitely something, that's one of our goals here at Palmetto Family.
Absolutely.
And particularly through our Church Ambassador Network, we're not turning it into the political arm of
Correct.
the church,
Right.
because most of what we're doing is reading the Bible and praying
Absolutely.
with leadership.
Absolutely.
But but civics responsibility is a part of human responsibility.
is.
Righteousness exalts a nation, and a sin is reproach to any people. So for right to prevail, you have to do what is right.
Yes.
And so we're going to make that a definite emphasis here going forward.
Absolutely.
Here at Palmetto Family. Well, tell us any other tidbits, information you want to share before we finish up.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of hit all the highlights. You know, obviously the general election is in November. I believe it's November the 3rd, so that'll be here before we know it. One of the interesting things about this particular November's elections is that the Democratic Party has a primary challenger, or has a challenger against every Republican in the state house.
Wow.
Which I don't think they've ever done before. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that moves things up and down. You know, they've got, their governor nominee is Jermaine Johnson, which, although we disagree on some policy, probably one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet.
Yeah,
I really, really, really like Jermaine.
Yeah, I do too. And the fact is, I've spoken with Jermaine and told him how much I respected him.
Yes.
He has a wonderful story about his life.
Yes, he does.
And so I think the Democrats were smart to vote him in, vote him as their candidate. But obviously, we vote on principle. That's the primary, not on personality.
Correct. Yes. So, but that's really all I have for today.
Well, listen, thank you, Randy, and thank you for giving us the insights that you have. And thank you for listening here. We are regularly online in our podcasts at the Palmetto Family Matters show. And so we look forward to the next episode we meet together.